For something to look like a metal, then it is dependent on two material properties. One, its reflection, and the other one is its metallicity. So I'm just loading a model in here. So this is from this product that Horo and I have made, and I'm also going to be using the HDRI image that comes with that as well, just because it's a suitable image for what I want to do. Just going to move this model around and reposition it so we can get a better look at it. I wanted something quite complicated looking to provide some interesting geometry, and also it's got a UV map associated with this model, which is quite handy for what I intend to do. So here we go, it's in a default material. I'll go into the material lab now, and I'm going to navigate to metals, precious. I'm going to pick out this gold brushed metal, which is one of the original metals supplied with Bryce. Now the key about this is that the diffuse colour is not being provided through direct lighting, it's being provided through the Metallicity channel and then via reflection. So if you take a Metallicity away, you just get the reflection. So you can see how Metallicity is transferring the diffuse colour into the reflection. The other property that helps sell this as a metal is the specularity. So you've got this specular response, which is very high. That is stimulated by the specular component of the Bryce sun, and that creates this highlight. The size of that highlight's halo is controlled through the luminance value of the specular halo, and also colour values affect that as well, and the colour of the specular highlight, which are both set to white. So if you meddle with these, you get slightly different effects, and when this gets very high, the halo spreads out, and indeed you can get an extreme effect by setting it right up. But that's by the by. So okay, right, I'll reload that material so we're back to the default level, and then we'll check out of here and have a look how that looks in the render. So to a large extent, because the reflection on this metal is so high, the appearance of it is highly dependent on the background that is present in the render. In this case, that background comprises of two things, or well, three really, I suppose you could say. There's this infinite ground plane that's a bit, well, plain, and the default Bryce sky, and there's some interreflection here, so the metal surface is reflecting backwards and forwards between itself, and that sells you on the idea of it being a reflective material. If we change the sky and fog settings here, we turn the atmosphere off and set it to fully black, then you'll see that the material looks a lot more basic, and that's because we're not providing very much information. So if we can provide a good reflective background, we'll get a better metallic effect, and this is where the HDRI image comes in. So if I go into the Skylab, go image based lighting, click this blob here, use HDRI image, go open, and navigate to anti-room HDR. That's a medium resolution HDRI image made by Horo, and open that. It looks a little bit dark, but before making any adjustments, let's just have a quick look how it looks in the scene. So at the moment we can't see very much of what's going on in the scene, and that's because the sunlight's been disabled and the output in the specular and the HDRI effect is low. In actual fact, we can get away without using these since we're mostly interested in reflection. So I'll set these values down to 0, set the quality down because we don't need to generate simulated light sources, and just add the background to the sky. So now we've added the background to the sky, we can start to see something because there's reflection there. If I increase the intensity a bit, we can see there's a bit more reflection. And before turning the sun on, let's nip out of here and see just what component is being provided by the backdrop. So don't worry about the resolution of the backdrop because we can move the camera so you can't see that. Just consider that now it looks quite convincingly metallic and it's not even lit. So there's no specular response, this is just reflection. We could, for example, provide a bit of reflection through this ground plane. So if I provide, well, reflection of 5, which isn't very much, you can't see much change there, but because we're dealing with a HDRI image, so there you go, you can see a bit of through that light, through that window. This white here, although we can only see it as white just here, has got more light value information in it than can be displayed on the monitor, and when it's attenuated through the reflection, so there you go, it's reduced, we can start to see some of the information that's hidden in that bright area. I can give you a better example of this by shifting the camera around and pointing it at this overhead fluorescent light. So if this was just an ordinary picture that you'd exported into Bryce, so you're using a sphere with this mapped on it, that could only be full white. But in actual fact, there's a load of levels in there that we can't see at this point because it's burned out on this display. But if we're only reflecting a bit of this, then these other levels will start to get toned down to a point where we can start seeing the difference. And this was what happens if we look at the floor where the reflection of that fluorescent light is. So where we've got this, we can now see the fluorescent light which looks fully white, and we can see the detail on the ceiling that was lost before. Again, don't worry about this pixelization. I've got the medium resolution loaded in. If we were actually looking at this reflection, we could load the high resolution in, but that's not really what this is about. We're interested just in reflection here and it creating a metallic effect. So to come back to our model, ignoring the background for the time being, in fact I'll just make it easier to ignore the background by moving the camera position. Okay, so what we need now is the light, just to light it up. So to do that, I'll just undisable the sunlight, move it around a bit, and because the sunlight produces a specular component here, then you'll get the specular response within the material, and the diffuse is casting this shadow onto the diffuse grey default. Well, default with a slight bit of reflection, infinite plane. So at this point now, it should look pretty convincing, and that's just the material that was supplied originally with Bryce. We can do better than that. I provided new materials with anisotropic effect with Bryce 7.1, which should, I hope, prove a visible improvement over this metal effect we have here. So if you want to know where that is and you don't know where it is, you can go to Horror's website. Here's the address. Go to Documents, Mine, Diverse, and download the Bryce Content FAQ, and that will show you where there's additional files that were installed with your 7.1 were hidden, if you like. Well, not hidden, they're just not very well signposted. So this will help you find things that you might otherwise not be aware that you'd got. I'm aware that I've got them, so I'm going to go and dig them out. So I'll just copy and paste that model so we can leave a version to compare with and apply the material that I was talking about. So if I just navigate to where I'd saved it, there we go, and it's this one. It's a gold material with this strong anisotropic specular response on its surface, and then we'll switch to the camera view and have a look at how that looks. So it looks a bit darker, but we've also got some anisotropic effect here which is changing the highlight, so it should look like a more realistic metal. If you feel that the anisotropic response is a bit weak, and knowing that it's coming from the specular component, so there's the anisotropic setting there, and it guides the specular component, you can widen the effect by increasing the luminance value of the specular halo. So we'll just turn that up. This also, by the way, in premium render mode affects the blurriness of reflections and transmission. But never mind that. Okay, right, so if I just widen the halo there a bit, you can see it has the effect of lightening the metal and spreading this sort of glazing effect across the surface. I wasn't really wanting to stop here. This is just on the way to where I wanted to go. I'm going to copy this shape again, and then we'll have 3, and we'll have another look at another metal. So I'll just let that render out in the background. I'll show you where I'm going to get this other metal from that we're going to modify and provide extreme settings through the deep texture editor, which will allow us to create an impossible metal that's like a super metal that can do things that things in real life can't, and interacts in an interesting way with a HDRI background and the lighting provided. So where was that? Okay, right. If we go to bryce5.com into the gallery, and then go to the material exchange and download this Metal 512, then you'll have something that looks as good as it's rendered out. I'll just copy and paste that, move that across, go into the material lab, and navigate to where I've saved the shared materials. I have so many materials, I get lost sometimes. Shared materials, and this one here, Metal 512. So I'll just give that a quick render so you can see what that one looks like. If I do use the plot render, it won't interfere with what we've got elsewhere. So you can see at the moment that doesn't look very much like gold, and because of the camera position we can't see very much into this. It's a material that's mapped using parametric mapping, and that parametric uses UV maps that's provided with these models. If, for instance, you didn't have a UV map and you wanted to apply it to a model, then you could swap this mapping mode out for, say, Object Cubic, and that would work to a degree. The thing that I learned from watching one of Horo's videos, which is on my YouTube channel, is that if you've got one of these repeating texture tiles and you're applying it through parametric mapping or other tiling, you need the scaling to be a multiple of 5.9. So what I'm going to use here, instead of 22, now I am wiser, is 59, which is 10 times 5.9. So I'm just modifying that now. It's going to increase the frequency of the material, that's fine. And that will end up looking like that, because I've moved it around a bit. But I want this to look like gold, so we'll start modifying this. In the diffuse channel, I'm going to switch from the diffusion provided through this texture component to this diffuse channel and provide it with just a gold colour. The reason it looks patchy is the reflections being controlled by this alpha channel through that, and I'm going to change that. I'm going to control reflection and metallicity through another channel in the deep texture editor, and as you can see, it's taken the checker random by chance, which was handy because that's what I'm going to use to modify and get my material. So if you don't know where that is and you want to get the checker, you can go to Basic and then get Check Blue and load it in that way. Just by chance it had loaded it in anyway. Don't worry about the mapping mode, we're just providing a single numerical output from this, and it's an out of range output. To set this up, go into the texture source editor and you have to click on these blobs to get these controls open, and then click on noise, and instead of square I want distance squared. I need minimum in here, octaves of 1, it wants to be 3D, and a frequency of -1. -1, and the practical upshot of that is that I'll just switch off colour and bump. You see this stripy pattern. The practical upshot of that is it's now providing a very high negative output. What I want is a moderately high, but higher than the usual output that you get from the DTE, positive output. So if I want to convert this into a positive, if I take this component and drag it over into component 2, switch this to difference, which is there, then take component 2 in the noise, go to octaves 0 and nothing, so that's a nothing. So the result of that difference operation is this is now a very high positive value, but I want only a moderately high positive value. So if I take this output here and change it to multiply, I can then multiply this output that's very high positive down to a moderate output by using a sine output here. Control Z, I need to select this one and then use a sine output here and then wind the value down, and you can see there's changes occurring here. This is looking really patchy and strange and multi-stripy coloured because it can't display, the thumbnail can't display the out of range values. As it comes towards more reasonable values, you'll see these stripes start to spread out, and if you're very careful you can pull these stripes out so you've nearly just got one stripe across the entire value on the output. So that is a just slightly out of range positive value. Now by using that, you can already see things have changed. We can start using the alpha scaling properties of these two channels to get it into a range where it actually provides us with a meaningful output. So we'll just check we've got alpha scaling selected, which we have, and then I'll take the metallicity down to 0, so you can see that looks white, and that's because the reflection's so high it's actually reflecting more than 100%, so it's actually acting as a mirror amplifier. Now if I start taking this down into lower values, let's try 3, you can see that's a super mirror, but it's just sort of in range now. Metallicity pulls in the diffuse colour and applies it to the reflection. So if I provide a bit of metallicity, and it's only going to be 0.1 to start with, that's not had much effect. So 0.1, there you go, it hasn't had effect. You can see that it's pulled the colour in and then it's sort of hit a threshold where it's not providing any reflection at all, and you can only see specular. So I want to get rid of that and just have a very strong colour. That's 0.5 is too high, so it's 0.04. I've got a bit. Now if I'm struggling for range here, which I am, what I can do is go back into here and use this value and try and reduce the output still further, so make the spread of the stripes a bit broader, and then go back into here, get rid of the metallicity then again, and set my reflection up so I've got a high reflection value, and then start reducing it again with the metallicity effect. So let's try 0.1 again this time. Okay, that's not sunk it in the middle. So let's try 0.2. Okay, that's good. Let's try 0.3. Okay, it's sunk in the middle, so let's go 0.25 because I've got the additional decimal plate. You can see now I've got very strong coloration and overpowered reflection, and what I'm hoping is that it'll look similar to what we had before, except where it starts reflecting itself, and then it'll start to amplify within itself. So you'll have an amplification out of this ordinary range of colours, and it'll turn brighter inside and get some sort of fancy effect. So let's see if we've achieved that. Yeah, there you go. Right, that wasn't too bad without looking. So I've had to make this video a few times to get this right. So what we have here then is, if you like, a super metal, and whenever it catches sight of itself, because it's generally increasing the power of whatever it reflects, it gets into a feedback cycle and starts getting brighter and brighter every time it sees itself. You can control the number of times it investigates and these bounces essentially between the reflecting surfaces with this option in the render options. So if I go to render options here, if we increase the maximum ray depth, that will tend to slow renders down with lots of reflection, because it will keep looking and looking and looking until it either sees the background or runs out of bounces. In this case, bounces is a valid thing to say. Transience uses a similar thing with the maximum ray depth, but that's what you feel like feelers that go into the environment as the light gathers. But it's a similar process, except that no images are formed, because it's to do with ambient light rather than, in this case, direct lighting, which is what we're working under now. We're not using Premiere Effects. So by increasing the maximum ray depth, you'll get more interreflections on metallic objects, so they will appear brighter, because there's less chance of it running out of reflections and just returning black, which is what it does when it reaches its maximum ray depth. So there you go. That is how you can set up a super reflective, super metallic metal in Bryce 7.1 Pro using the Deep Texture Editor to generate out of range values. And even though I've set the maximum ray depth up to 12, you can see that the render time's not too bad on my machine, which is a fairly fast computer, I'd say, not super fast. And we're not really using the HDRI lighting, we're just using the HDRI as a backdrop, and we can get away with the lower HDRI resolution because you can't really see much of the HDRI directly. You might be able to see a bit here, but that's because we're using a very plain, flat surface to reflect it. So we're getting a bit of filled in reflection here, because this would otherwise be reflecting the ground plane. So that completed while I was talking. If you want to see the effect of just a default grey ground plane, for example, it only had like 5% reflection there. The render time is going to be a lot faster because there's no interreflection between the ground, but you do lose a bit of detail in these areas where it's reflecting just the ground. But you have that choice to make. You could use a more interesting material on the ground plane. Let's go for a classic here. Let's bring the check blue back in. Let's see how that's going to go. Object space is going to give me a grid. So you can see now in this case where the reflection is now reflecting the grid, and that's a hideous effect. But hopefully it makes the point that what's in the environment as far as metal's concerned is critical to its appearance. So that's the end of the video. I hope you found that interesting and you'll find it useful, and that you'll experiment with these out of range material properties that can be generated from the Deep Texture Editor.